I'm Dr. Rosalind Austin, and welcome to Researcher Revealed, the podcast where we go beyond just the name that's written on a poster presentation or a publication in a medical journey to find out more about the people who are making research happen. Today I spoke to Robert Hull. He had a different journey after his PhD, and he sheds light on what can happen after a research project has had that interesting observation in order to fully implement it into the real world. Keep listening to get top tips on how you can build impact into your research project. I'm Dr. Rosalind Austin, and welcome to Research Revealed. On today's episode, we have the very lovely Robert Hull. Robert, can you introduce yourself to everybody? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So hi, I'm Rob. So my background is I used to be a microbiologist. So I did my PhD in slime and goo and sort of all things that were wet and bacterial. But sort of, yeah, my background developed from there to going into the working for the NHS, the National National Healthcare System here in the UK. Mostly because academia isn't very good if you've got lots of small children and they need a mortgage in order to have a bedroom. So in there, I joined two lovely organizations. One was then called the Academic Health Science Network, who are sort of all about helping people who are developing new pieces of tech or innovators, and the other being the Clinical Research Network, as it was then called, which was all about getting new clinical trials into the NHS. And that was really exciting because it was sort of moving from an academia world where I had worked quite a lot with companies, as well as sort of the more academic focused bits. But sort of seeing a huge breadth of different technologies and innovation. I think that was probably the kickstart to sort of where my career has gone. So I was working with people all the way from, you've had a lovely idea on a dog walk through to you need some clinical trials, evaluation and pilots, through to getting sort of the evidence and the health economics through to sort of demonstrate that there's a return on investment for healthcare systems, that it actually does stuff for patients, does what it says on the tin, and all the regulatory bits that go along with it. And so I worked within the NHS in sort of various hats for quite a long time doing that. It was a brief stint, as most people did in the NHS at that point, to do COVID things and sort of setting up the COVID vaccine clinical trials. So it was a big bit. But then these children kept growing and they sort of needed a bit of a bedroom of their own each. So I went off and joined the world of consulting, which I sort of did for 18 months, which was quite fun. Got to do sort of the same thing, but for usually bigger companies, but then you got a sort of a whole bag full of other toys. So in terms of having health economists who you can bug for giving their analyses and their views. And yeah, I sort of work with NHS organisations as a partner doing that, and sort of the big introduction to the pharma world. But I said, actually, I can probably do this myself, which might describe my hubris. And so that was what made me sort of stick off and do Cadra Insights. So that was started up my own company to do sort of more work with the NHS. So I did quite a bit of that. But also sort of working with small companies and individuals in developing their tech, sort of hopefully for a healthcare system. So that's a bit of a rattle through, but that's what I now do.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Just hold that thought, Robert. Oh, that's really interesting, Robert. Thank you so much for giving me a few more details into what you do. Kind of did a whistle-stop tour. Now we're going to revisit that in a little bit more detail because I want to talk about, what led you into this journey and how research played a part in that. But before we do, we've got to do the rapid 11. Are you ready?
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So are you a Windows or Mac user?
I'm a Windows user.
All right. Are you a tea or coffee drinker?
Yeah, absolutely coffee.
Oh, okay. When you're writing or doing work that requires concentration, do you prefer to have silence or some form of music in the background?
Always music, probably. Well, yeah, always music, probably. And it gets more intense the closer the deadline gets.
Ooh, describe intense.
it probably gets a bit more electronic, and
Okay.
more Darude Sandstorm than
Okay.
classical as time goes on.
Okay. Nice. I'm a big fan of using electronica for writing.
Okay. What's
Because it's
your
like,
go-to?
well, so it doesn't have words, so you're not tempted to necessarily sing along to it, and it's got a really steady beat. And if you get like a
Mm.
progressive track as well, then it builds a little bit, so it like pushes you
Okay,
on.
yeah. I feel that. Absolutely.
Ah, fair enough. Where do you tend to work? At home or in an office?
Oh, mostly at home, yeah.
Home office. Perfect. And what time of day would you say that you are most productive?
Ooh. Um, Probably the morning
Okay.
or quite late at night.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. There's no right or wrong. It's just about getting
No,
to
no,
know who
yeah,
you
yeah.
are a little bit
What's-
better.
when the coffee hits.
Fair enough. Or the numbers of coffee, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. You got to build up to a reasonable baseline.
Exactly. When you're writing, what would you
Mm.
say is your favorite referencing management system? So not like Harvard versus Vancouver, but like EndNotes, Altero,
Uh,
Mendeley.
I think favorite is a strong word. I guess through sheer volume of bits, it's probably been EndNote, but it's mostly been required by others at various points. So I think EndNote through sheer mass, but
Okay.
calling it a favorite is difficult.
So basically a system, not a system, a program that other people use to torture you.
Yes, absolutely. And it's
Okay.
sort of, you get to the deadline and it very suddenly gets upset and you sort of just weep.
I know. Why can't they make EndNote, like as fancy as EndNote is, why can't they make it so that it doesn't have like a hissy fit every time the deadline's getting there?
Yeah, yeah.
And why can't you should like have it so that whenever if you look at a document and you happen to be traveling, it then tries to like automatically change the language to whatever country you're in, even though
Oh,
you
God,
haven't
yeah,
changed the
yeah.
language.
Yes,
Hooray!
it's that added excitement. It's like the printer that knows that you really need to print something now, and it says absolutely not today.
I never
But
thought of
it's
it
the
like that.
digital form. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I love it. Right. What about when it comes to creating, building, drawing, any data visualization, whether that's like a logic flow diagram or graph? What is your favorite program to do that?
Ooh. I might get shot, but I quite like PowerPoint. It's easy. I have used other things, but I think PowerPoint probably gets used the most. And yeah, I don't mind it now.
So I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I need to do like a social media post about this because I found it really funny because I'd say pretty much a lot of guests on this have like they talk about PowerPoint when it comes to data visualization as this like terrible and dirty secret. Like they should be able to do something better or more fancy. And I think actually PowerPoint is a really good tool for doing data viz because you can layer stuff, you can, you can do a lot of
Yeah,
fancy things without needing to learn something as complicated as like Adobe Illustrator.
yeah. I think it comes from seeing graphic designers do the beautiful stuff, and you're like, ah, yes, I do just shuffle the boxes. I can use the align tool. Look at me go. And I think it's makes me very aware of my own shortcomings.
I think one, be nice to yourself. Two, we all can't be graphic designers, so
Yeah, but it's
yeah,
so
I do.
pretty.
Exactly. What about, do you have a favorite desk snack?
Ooh. So I think the answer is yes. And if we talk about health outcomes, my mum for Christmas got me a waffle maker, and I can go
Ooh.
from nothing to homemade waffles in about 5 minutes, which is very bad for my health. And I think that's probably the most decadent way of eating at the desk, because it's all too easy because it's sat at home. It's stuff's just, kitchen's a couple of meters that way. Yeah, you can smash that out pretty quick.
So
Don't
jealous.
buy one. It's very bad for you.
I'm so jealous. It's ridiculous. So growing up in Canada, waffles were always like a big like weekend breakfast.
Yeah.
And in the UK, they're not like that big of a thing here.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking like the super thick fancy Belgian waffles. I'm just talking like the equivalent of like the waffles that you can buy here in the UK but taste like rubbish in the plastic
Oh yeah.
wrap in the grocery store. So like sort of like that, but much, much better. And when I first moved to the UK, I looked at getting a waffle maker and then I was like, no, they are bad for you.
They are, but I'm not going to get rid of it. It's too delicious. I mean, and if you really want to feel your arteries clog, it's you can do s'mores waffles where you melt the marshmallows and the chocolate, whack two together, and knock a couple of weeks off your life. Easy peasy.
Nice. I'll keep it in mind for when I want to start knocking the weeks off my life. Oh, too funny. Right, we're getting there. When you're planning or organizing, whether it's a project, whether it's a new whatever, are you a pen and paper person, or are you a digital tool planner?
I think aspiring to digital, but it always ends up to be scribbled bits of stuff. There's post-it notes get stuck along the bottom of the computer screen, and there's various notebooks with stuff jammed in. Comments on Word documents, okay, but I think I always degrade quite rapidly to scribbled pieces of paper.
Preaching to the choir there. Right. Yeah. Two more questions. Next one, my personal favorite question, is what book are you currently reading?
Ooh. So I'm very slowly making my way through The Hogfather that I was bought for Christmas by one of my kids, which is by Terry Pratchett.
Okay.
And I keep forgetting and dropping it off. Otherwise, with my 8-year-old, we're very into Amelia Fang at the moment. So vampire adventures for 8-year-olds would recommend.
Nice. I love it. It's such an important thing is to have a book for you, but also to have books that you're reading to children if you have a child. So that's really cool. Thank you. Right. Last question. Who is a researcher who you admire?
Ooh. That's a good question. I'm very bad at names in general.
You don't have to name somebody. Describe, if you can't come up with a name off the top of your head, describe who that person is, and we'll leave them nameless.
So I guess most people who have been involved in vaccine research, I think, should probably get a bit of a shout out. I'm going to smooth, broad brush that over, as I am awful with names. Even I could probably pick up, Salk or whoever who done some pretty serious work. But I think anyone who's managed to seriously get some vaccines into people, there's a few better ways to improve people's health outcomes and save kids' lives effectively.
Nice, cool. Right. Now we're going to jump in a time machine, and we're going to go back to the university student who had yet to do a PhD. What was it that drove you and made you want to do a PhD? Because PhDs are basically research training. So I think you're the first like biochem person that I've spoken to. So is it normal to go on and do a PhD, or is that a bit of an unusual thing? What drove you?
So I always liked biology, and I also liked the show Scrubs an awful lot. And so I wanted to be a medical doctor because, essentially I wanted what JD and Turk had from Scrubs. But I was also didn't go to medical school. I can't do nights. So I ended up doing biomedical science and really enjoyed that. But after university, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, so I actually ended up going into industry for a little bit first,
Okay.
and ended up working with sort of initially in bacterial goo. So,
Mm-hmm.
but this wasn't in the nice health stuff. This was, so you got a car factory and it makes horrible toxic chemicals to stamp out bits of car and lubricate the machines, but you can break those down with bacteria, which is quite cool. But I also decided that I didn't want to be working in toxic waste because it's very smelly and it's horrible. So I decided that instead of being, going down to the lab tech and the immediate industry side in sort of bacterial technologies, I thought these things called biofilms, so the bacterial slime, they're really cool. I like health. I did biomedical science. This seems to stick the two together. And
Okay.
so I sort of ended up going to the University of Southampton, which had sort of a good biofilms bacterial bit that I could lean on. And off into the world of PhDs I went. I think quite a few people do go and do PhDs in the UK. I don't think it's sort of unheard of, but I didn't think it was by any means sort of a great proportion of my undergrad went off and did that.
Okay. Okay. So sort of just following sort of a bit of a desire to take those that skills and knowledge that you learned both in industry
Hmm.
and in your undergrad, but turn it into something that would at least get you a bit closer to being JD and Turk.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, but also sort of if you're a lab tech in industry, I think where I was in the UK at that point, there was a bit of a, I don't know if a glass ceiling is the right word, but you're
Okay.
going to struggle to go too far if you didn't have the PhD. It was something that was looked for. So I thought, maybe I do academia, but I want to do something health. Maybe this is a nice pivot back to health.
Okay. Okay. That just helps me. I think like because initially when I started this podcast, I've been speaking more
Mm.
to clinicians, like not medical doctors, but any other type of clinician. And their pathway I'm very used to. But you being somebody sort of outside of that, just a bit curious to kind of figure out
Mm.
how you ended up going for a PhD. So you get your PhD in, as you call it, goo.
Yeah.
Um, focused more on health over toxic waste, where you were in pre-PhD.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then, as you kind of talked about in your introduction, and I'm not going to ask you to repeat it again. So then you then started to dip in and out of various different roles, companies, academic
Yeah.
institutions to get to where you are now. So instead
Yes.
of describing that journey, what I want to ask you to do is following your experiences in research in your PhD,
Mm.
what did research look like for you, and how has keeping research as a part of your career and what you
Mm.
do land you at Cadra?
Okay. I'll try to keep to that. So I guess after the PhD, research was initially working with companies saying, we've got this thing and we think it works. Can you help us show that it works, or that it doesn't? And so that was quite interesting for me in academia, and that took sort of the form of a postdoc. But as I started to leave, nearly everybody in academia probably has a PhD or something similar, or it's common, right?
Yeah.
But then as I took a step out to the NHS, it was very different, and suddenly the people do all kinds of research without a PhD, and they thought a PhD was quite fancy. Ooh, look at you. And so it then became sort of very much more applied. So it's people who's developing bits of tech for the NHS. What's it going to show, even more so than those sort of industry projects with academia. And how can we help them along that way? How can they get the regulatory hurdles? But also it was much more sort of research that wasn't just answering an interesting question, which is great. But if you're looking to get a piece of tech into a healthcare system, then you have to answer the questions of the people who are going to make the decision. So it's all well and good answering a really interesting question, but if it doesn't answer the bits that the finance people are going to sign off need to see, then it was a bit of a waste of time probably. So there was much more there. And then so with the clinical research network, it was helping them, get those clinical results. What actually shows benefits to patients. And then COVID hit, and it was very much, right, we now need to know, do these vaccines work? And then I was taking a step away. I wasn't really doing the data analysis or full-on research. It was, where on earth can we find enough places to stick things in people's arms so they can, and have all the right equipment and have all the right things so that we can see which of those vaccines work. And we need to do it really quickly as well. So that was running around and going to hotels and sports grounds and anywhere else that we could co-op and grab a space and grab some equipment so that the research teams could do what they needed to do. And then, sort of taking a step further, it was sort of into the consulting land. It was not only do you need to show, got that interesting question and you're pushing forwards, but what's the return on investment going to be? If the healthcare system makes a big chunk of money available in order to buy your gear and to implement it and go through all those rigmaroles, what are they going to see back, and then how can you access those markets? I guess that's a slightly different tint again. I think that might answer your question, but I think I've ended up rambling off to one side.
No, so I really like how you kind of summed that up, because I think depending on your interface with research at whatever point, whoever out there is listening, you're going to have a very different perspective on what research looks like. So, the PhD student is going to think one thing versus a research nurse thinking another, versus somebody who works in a CRO, something else, versus a health tech company. And research actually is this big entity that a lot of people just think is what you described, is where it's often the launch point, like an interesting question.
Yeah.
So I think what might be interesting is that actually, from your perspective, what would you describe as, actually, I'll take that back. Would you describe research as sort of that cycle that you've just described? So interesting idea, a place to make it happen.
Yeah.
And then a way to document and communicate the impact that research has on patients in order to go around. Or do you see it as something different?
So I guess in terms of, healthcare research, I think there's maybe a piece for keeping patients involved throughout that, which I think, the communicating bit, as you described it there, sounds like it just came at the end, but I think there's probably a continuous pinging backwards and forwards with patients throughout that process. So I think it's, not just the one dissemination point.
Yeah. Oh, no, I totally agree. Like, it has to, like, dissemination is, again, it's a complicated thing as well, but it's, I think for me, where I really started to understand research more was an understanding that often the bit as a researcher that you're much more focused on is only a small part of it. And so it is about that. How do you make it have, so a lot of universities use the term impact now, or innovation. But all research should have a degree of that. Now, whether or not that impact and innovation is big enough to land you in the headlines, or whether or not it's a small policy or procedural update, depends on what that interesting question was. But it's a much bigger picture than just what I think a lot of people imagine it to be.
Yeah, and it's got that sort of the whole swathe from going and looking at a bacteria and going, wow, this is its bacterial machinery, and if we fiddle with this bit here, that's really cool, that's really exciting. And I would say I do miss that a bit, but actually, if you can show that, and this is one of my like to ramble on about, if you can show that in the UK, Sure Start centres, so for those who didn't know, they used to exist, and they would help people basically be better parents for their kids, and a whole gamut of other things in the healthcare services, and they're being brought back under a slightly different name now. But if you can show that they are an efficient and effective way to spend tax money, that's not that exciting to think about, particularly if you already think they're pretty great. But if that's what moves the dial and results in a policy change, then it's much more impactful and meaningful, even if it's not quite so sexy in terms of, you know, the raw science, if you like, or depending on your point of view.
I was going to exactly challenge you on that, and I think again that comes back down to like where everybody comes from and what that background not forces but encourages you to believe is sexy. Because like, yes, understanding a bacterial mechanism might be interesting and might be knowledgeable and might have like really big impacts.
Yeah.
You know, there's other bigger system things that can have an even bigger impact than understanding the mechanism of a single bacteria.
Yeah.
That are sometimes a lot more complicated to understand. So like, you know, like you were saying, like those Sure Start programs, like I think one of the things that is going to be really interesting about this new 10-year NHS plan is one of the focuses is on preventative medicine and preventative health care. But how do you prove that prevention works?
Yeah. Well, this is a question for me. So how do you prove that prevention works? So, I mean, vaccines are the easy one, right? Because you can say, look, if we do this, then further down the line, you have an awful lot less sick people and your healthcare system doesn't fall over, which is good. Sure Start centers, I think, are also pretty good. You know, they were up until 2010 or so, they were being run and they were providing services to the community. And they vanished, and suddenly children's healthcare outcomes, there were other reasons as well, you know, they start declining. And people are like, oh my goodness, you know, what could possibly be causing this? Well, you pulled the support, so these people are less supported. So I think, you know, it's got to be that. Some of it feels obvious, and if you already like something, then you know you feel you probably don't need to do a big and expensive analysis. But if you can convince people to actually measure it and do the healthcare outcomes and demonstrate it, then it becomes a bit of a no-brainer. But I mean, governments always say, yes, we'll do lots more prevention. And then it always ends up with more treatment, the same way that we've been saying for a long time. We need to move away from hospitals, which are big and expensive, and people generally don't want to go and hang out in a hospital. They much prefer to hang out at home. So we'll see. The eternal optimist in me is optimistic.
And I agree, and I think I am too. But I think like exactly, even some of those examples that you were giving, is prevention is a harder thing to prove works, because there's so much that happens after that thing, and things get really complicated, that untangling somebody's outcomes 10 years later because they had access to the Sure Start program can be a bit more tricky. And that's where I think, like you, I'm optimistic, because for ages I've felt the exact same way, that we need to have much more preventative and supportive care rather than, ooh, let's react to something after it's already happened and the damage has been done and hope that a Band-Aid fixes these complicated issues, when often those complicated issues might be less complicated if you started a bit earlier. Yeah.
And it's, if someone's going to trip and fall, let's catch them when they've, tripped a little bit, rather than face planted.
Exactly. Okay. So that's how research you got to know about research then through a couple of different angles and a couple of different applications following your PhD. And then at some point, again, I'm going to use your words, not mine, your hubris led you to creating Cadra Insights. So quickly, what is Cadra Insights?
So Cadra Insights is a consulting company, I think, and what we do is help people on that journey, anywhere from, you've had a good idea on a dog walk through to you're a large scale company. And regardless of that, you still need to demonstrate your value to healthcare systems of whatever it is you're putting in. So sort of do all the different sort of, I guess, researchy bits there, but it might not be as a typical academic research question. It might be like, what does the clinical pathway actually look like? What does it cost? How can you disrupt it? What sort of insights can we draw on? So I work with sort of a big network of people who are working at, in academia but also throughout the NHS at all levels. So we can say, right, let's not guess if we want to work out what finance directors or what have you think about a particular innovation or technology. Let's just go ask 3 of them and do that in a structured way. But also sort of working directly with NHS organisations on how they do and implement innovation, how they can work out what they need for their clinical pathways, or sort of where different clinical pathways might be appropriate. And then, yes, I guess some of the bit of the strategy side. So it was great to host the government of Nepal to come over for a workshop series on, how they can better be approaching nutrition and how that can support their communities, and sort of all sorts of interesting topics like, okay, there are less typically grown crops out there which are great and grow well in those bits of the Himalayas, and if you mix some of those into this and you make it attractive and you market it well, and then you can actually have something that's much more nutritionally beneficial, which you can give to kids, right? And the most famous one of those is it's I'm going to say it wrong now, but the pumping up the peanut butter one, plummy nut, where you can mix a whole bunch of stuff in essentially with peanut butter and give it to kids, and they get all those macro and all of the micronutrients, and suddenly you've got better kid outcomes. But if people can make that more locally rather than having to ship it in, then it's even better.
Okay. So literally now, instead of like going from your world as a PhD student in GU, you now are involved in research projects that can be as diverse as a dietary project from Nepal up to innovating new technologies in the NHS.
Yeah, it's just all sorts of things. I'm always surprised by what comes along.
Okay, cool. So how then, in that role, what does your interface with research now look like?
So I guess I still talk to a bunch of academics, and so we because they're my mates. So and there's still the academic side and the thinking, what papers might be published, but it's mostly on healthcare systems. So what is effective? What are the health economics that make this work? What evaluation analysis can we draw on to show that we've got, if you do X, then you have Y fewer GP appointments for this patient groups, which means that they're freed up to do other things, or if you disrupt the pathway here. So I think it's much more likely to be on the operational side, or the return on investment, or those patient outcomes, or mapping out what a particular part of a healthcare system actually looks like, instead of what might just be written down somewhere.
Okay, so much more than your research is shifting to more like real world analysis, proceeds analysis, impact and implementation sort of evaluation style.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Okay, which is I think it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is I think there's a good amount of people who believe research is the pathophysiology behind a drug, or exercise post-surgery, or things like that. But there's a whole bigger part of that cycle that we've talked about that needs to happen as well. And so from your point of view, you're now shifting to try and help whoever has done that interesting research study in order to make it more impactful. It's like, okay, how do we get policymakers, decision makers, CEOs of hospitals, all of those sorts of people sit up and take notice? And that's a different branch of research.
Yeah, I think it's if for healthcare stuff, if it doesn't eventually end up helping someone, then it's not worth it, because everything builds up on top of everything else as a lovely pile. But yeah, mostly you want to see it ending up having a real world application, or I'd like to. Although, my PhD was quite arcane, so I get the enjoyment of the more arcane bits.
But I think, like you say, especially in health, like most people who start out a project in a given thing within health, they're doing it, especially like a lot of the clinicians that I've spoken to and the research that they've done, they've done it out of a curiosity sparked by some sort of gap or unanswered question that they saw in the healthcare system in their day-to-day clinical practice. And I think you're right. Like, I think a lot of times, while that research is good and it's interesting, and yes, it will contribute to the generic knowledge, there's a much smaller percentage of that research that gets translated into that real world. And I think in the UK anyway, there's a bit of a focus on people being clinical academics in an attempt to try and not quicken, but better ensure that transition between academic research and impact in the real world. And so it's great to hear that in your own journey, that's sort of what your consultancy is all about, is helping those researchers be able to get those policymakers, get those influencers to stand up and take notice. I mean, I was just at a conference and there were sessions on how do you do this? And it was sort of very loosely talked about, but it sounds like what you're doing is a lot more structured.
Yeah, I think it's how can we get XYZ technology into the NHS or somewhere else if it's if it's a different country. And I think at the moment that percentage is way too low. So I was speaking to somebody else the other day, and they were talking about gastrointestinal cancers. And so this probably isn't broadly applicable, but it's a fraction of a percent of biomarkers that are researched for what in that area that actually make it through, and that feels like there's quite a lot of waste in there that could be better harnessed, right? Because it's even if 10% of people or 10% of biomarkers are good and 90% are not, that still feels too low. But we're not even in single digit percentage of new biomarkers being used for stuff. So why is that? And I'm not quite sure why, other than it's really expensive. But I think there needs to be a bit of a better focus and drive towards the implementation bit, not dropping things. But then it all comes down to funding, right? It's all very easy for me to say because I'm not the one chucking large amounts of money at it.
And I think though, like it's a well recognized issue within research. I mean, I read not that long ago, there was a paper, I don't know when it was published, but it came across on my social media feeds that says in general, it can take at least 18 years for research to be translated into health care systems and services. And I think that's true for your really big if that's true, if you're really big flashy studies, then how much harder is it for impactful but smaller research and programs to battle through that long pathway?
18 years is a very long time. Nobody sets out and thinks, in 20 years I will have something that might eventually make it to an evaluation of a hospital where it was then shown that it wasn't it wasn't cost effective, and so is going to be dropped forever, or might be taken up and then spends two further years languishing in some sort of regulatory limbo potentially. So I don't think I have any answers. I can just pontificate and say, wouldn't it be nice?
No, but I think despite you saying you don't have any answers, the fact that you are making a living from trying to help researchers, clinicians, whoever
Yeah.
it is who have these ideas, who do a research study on them that says, yep, this is good, navigate those very, very stormy waters with lots of hidden rocks in it, that there isn't clear navigation around how to go from, yay, it's an idea, through to implementation without it taking 18 years. So
Yeah.
that being said, and I'm totally springing this on you, so if you need to have a minute to think,
No, let's go for it.
what would be your, like, so there's a lot of people around the world who are listening to this who are like early career researchers, or an even more established researchers. But what would your top tips be to somebody who might just be at the idea of, oh, what if? You know, what are some foundational things from your experience that researchers should be thinking about in order to try and increase the probability of successful real world implementation?
Okay. So I think you just immediately start thinking about who the users are, and that might be both clinicians and patients,
Yeah.
and as to whether your idea kind of works with them. And I guess if you're a little bit further along the line, you know, what's the current clinical pathway? Can you slot into it, or is it going to have to be, you know, reinvented? And then sort of as you go along, it's sort of making sure that you're designing things with people, because it's very easy to think that you have all the answers, and make sure that the people that you're asking, whether clinicians, and I'm sure I'm just as guilty as everybody else, but it's quite easy just to go and ask your mates. And you know, lots you say, oh, you know, what work have you done with patients and clinicians? And it's like, well, I've done it with my 14 nearest and dearest, and they all said it was great because, you know, they come over for lunch. So, you know, you've got to do it with diverse sets of people, most of whom who don't like you, or, you know, at the very least neutral, so that it's you know, it's been tested broadly, because otherwise you end up with things like the pulse oximeters during COVID, where, you know, they were found, you know, people with dark skin to basically not work nearly as well. So you don't really want, nobody should be introducing a new health inequality just because they haven't asked enough people about what they're doing as they go along. And also, you know, obviously do robust science and all that. Get those N numbers up.
Yeah. And then what about the regulatory bits?
Ooh, okay. So, you know, you got the, if you're thinking MedTech in the UK, then you can do the UK CA mark, although we're still covered by the CE mark. And do you want this? It's getting wiggled about a bit at the moment, the sort of full regulatory pathway. But so we've got NICE, and got the MHRA, so, who are sort of key regulators in the UK. And if you think that you're going to, you know, be developing a medical device of whatever level, then you want to be making sure that you're sort of engaging with those people and the standards and the institutions who can help certify you at the earliest stage, because there's often very long timelines on getting that, and you don't want to get to, you know, yes, we're ready to go, and then to be told, well, you know, it's 18 months minimum until we can actually assess your piece of tech, because if you've only got a runway of 6 months, which, you know, that might be the case, then that can kill it. So it's just important to bear that in mind along the way. Understanding the pathway, not only sort of showing that it, you know, everybody wants to show that it's great for patients, and obviously that's really important. But you've got to show it's cost effective as well. Because if you're not showing it's cost effective in the format that, you know, the finance directors want to see or what have you, then they're just going to say no, and you're sort of sat there with this thing that you know is going to be great for patients, but the healthcare systems can't afford it, or, you know, or don't have the information to confirm that they can afford it. And then that's really frustrating, because it's, and that could have been just, you know, let's go talk to the right people and ask them the right questions straight off the bat, because the clinicians that you spoke to really wanted to answer XYZ question, but what they actually needed was, you know, W and V mixed in there as well, just to make sure that you're getting those right outcomes. And all it would have cost you was, you know, putting a couple of extra questions or recording a couple of extra bits of data in your trial design or your evaluation design, but you can't go back and redo it very easily, typically. So I think it's just making sure you've asked the right people the right questions before you get too far down.
I like that. And it sounds like such a silly thing to say, but it's easy to say, ask the right people the right questions.
Yeah.
But it's hard to find out who those right people are and what those questions are.
Yeah. So I mean, there's plenty of great sort of free support in the from the NHS. There's the health innovation networks are great, and I used to work for one. I would recommend that people in the UK reach out. They also do overseas bits, but I think it's come talk to people like me, come talk to the healthcare system, and say, right, no, we're looking at doing this. Who would be involved in the decision making? Let's map it out. Let's work out who your key decision makers are. Then let's go and find people in that sort of role or similar to it, so we can say, right, we're thinking of doing this. What are the key bits? And then even when you get there and you're doing the evaluation and sort of making sure that it's sanity checked as you go along and not sort of just waiting until the end, because you might get a negative result. We had a really sort of apocryphal evaluation of a piece of software that was imaging, right? And it was like, right, we're going to do this imaging piece in the community, so that people won't have to go into the consultants, and you'll save lots of time. And it wasn't working. It was like, my goodness, what's going on? And so it turned out that these lovely, beautiful, high-resolution images were being taken. They were then being sent to the consultants, but they were being then printed out in black and white on a low-res printer, and then being put in a drawer, which was then nominally be reviewed by the consultants, who went, "This is rubbish. I can't see anything." And so nothing changed, because nobody had gone and made sure that the medical secretaries and the data information bits had understood what this was for. And so if you don't sort of bring everybody with you, you can fall down at the evaluation stage, even when when you're sat there thinking that this could never happen, or I can't conceive of such a thing happening. So I think it's just being prepared for the unexpected of it as well, and making sure everybody understands what you're doing and why.
I think that's a really good summary, and thank you very much for sharing that, because I think I feel fortunate, because having been a research nurse similar to you, I've seen research from a couple of different angles, and I've seen exactly that happen. What you're describing, where either the people in the IT system aren't able to make the connection, or the firewalls or security walls, or people don't realize that all they do is click on the link, because you'd be surprised at the amount of really intelligent, and it's like you said, think of both users, because just because you can save people's lives doesn't make you an IT genius.
Yeah. And if your new piece of tech requires the nurse to click through two things, select the right option, which isn't something they've used before, then you might have failed at that point. It's got to be really intuitive and non-disruptive, which if you've sat there and developed it for the past 2 years, of course it's really intuitive. So you need some slightly unfriendly nurses to say, I don't like this and it's unpleasant, and go away. And then you say, no, please, I've iterated on what you've said, and here is a better version. And you do that a few times, right?
Yeah.
And you do it in a few different places. So it's got to be with those other people in mind.
Exactly. And it's things like testing it in their situation, rather than giving them a computer where it's going to work, because various different NHS hospitals will have varying levels of firewalls or blocks on what those computers can or can't do based on that institution's IT department. And so even though it might work on your home computer easy peasy, on an NHS computer,
does it function?
I find it still really, really interesting, the amount of clinicians who I'll speak to for one reason or the other, and we'll arrange a video call, because to me, I mean, I was doing video calls because of how my PhD was supervised before they got cool
Yeah,
with COVID.
yeah,
And for me, this is a very normal way of communicating. I don't find it odd. I don't find it, yes, I prefer in person, but a lot of conversations that I have wouldn't happen if I had to do them in person. But there's a high number of people who work in the NHS who their NHS machines don't have the capacity for video or for microphones.
yeah, yeah. And they were away, and but it also might be the case that none of their piece of software talk to each other. And the idea of adding another piece of software. So, if you're running a clinic and you have to have 7 things open, it doesn't really matter what that 8th piece that you claim does. No. Then you're just not going to use it.
No.
You can do clever things with process automation and whatever to unify those now, but it's those barriers that you're going to have to work against as well. So it's unfair, but something you have to do.
Well, I think the truth of the matter is, and it goes back to like the new 10-year plan, like, and I mean, I try to be optimistic, but at the same time, when I was reading through it and it was like one system to rule them all with, I nearly died laughing.
Yeah, it's I've been talking to people like integrated care records sort of earlier this year, and it was thinking about, okay, well, is there is there going to, do we need to do this or do we need to do that, or is there is a single one going to be? I mean, people were disbelieving, to put it politely, that a single patient record was going to swoop in. It's a great ambition, and you can see that the wins are there. And I think this might go across the 10-year plan, is that maybe to think of it as less of a plan and more of a set of policy ambitions. And then I think it makes it a little bit more making sense. And I get that it's really ambitious from that point of view, and it's and we're going to have several large government IT projects all work seamlessly. And if you put it like that, but I can see where the ambition is, and that you could realize those benefits. But the implementation looks challenging to the extreme.
Yeah, and like it's just, I don't know. I think I'm in a weird place because I know it's possible because I've seen it work. So back in the dark ages, when I did my nursing in Canada, the hospital that we were in converted from a million different systems, mostly which were paper-based, into a single computer system.
Yeah.
That ruled them all and was connected with community records and all. And I mean, it was beautiful and it was lovely. But I shudder to think the amount of investment that went into that.
Yeah, I think that's starting to drift into politics. But it's can there be sufficient investment so that you can reach a critical mass of things that make the whole system run more smoothly? And there's a bit of and we'll wave our AI magic wand. But I'm married to an AI software engineer, so I also kind of get that this is doable.
Yeah.
But probably quite challenging to get it work on the size and the scale, and that's inclusive enough for everybody, right? Because unless your chatbot works the same in huge numbers of, well, not a huge number, quite a large number of languages, then you're really going to struggle. And if I'm being super snarky, then I put my NHS net zero targets hat on and ask, well, this is an awful lot of energy you're burning for lots of AI bits. How's that going to work? But that's probably quite far down the worries list for anybody.
But I think, again, like if we veer away from talking about politics, because we're going down a dark alley, and I just looked at the time and it has flown by, Robert. I think for me, I've really enjoyed hearing more about like your research journey and what you do, because I think like in what we've just been talking about, and like those instead of a 10-year plan, think about it as that 10-year ambition. There's going to be loads of people who are like, oh, I've got an idea. We can do this, we can do that. And whether it's AI software engineers, whether it's other digital tech people, whether it's biomolecular scientists who figure out a new bacteria that solves all the world's problems, I think it's about, for me, I now have a better understanding of sort of where somebody like you is able to help convert what is possible into what is probable, and that you do that using research tools that translate what I see as value into value for a policymaker, a financial officer, a clinician, a patient, whoever that user is, so that that idea actually makes an impact, and not just like, yay, those big global impacts in lower energy and healthier populations, but to those people. Am I getting it right, or have I completely
I think it's a very flattering way of putting it. No, I think that's pretty good. I mean, yeah, as I said, it's very flattering of you, so I'll take it. But yeah, I mean, it's still about answering interesting questions, but let's take the interesting, biotech or pharma or whatever, and turn it into something that is helping people.
Yeah. Very cool. Right, last question before we wrap it up here. To all of the biomedics out there who have no idea that there's a world beyond goo.
Yeah.
And to anybody who's listening, why would you recommend they do research?
Ooh. I mean, quite often it's just really cool, right? Doing the research, but I think it's why do research? Well, hopefully the aim is to help somebody at some point, right? Which is a pretty good goal to go for. Yeah, I think that probably sums it up. And it's interesting. And if you're thinking why should I do this for myself? I think research is essentially answering questions, and answering questions, I think, is probably the best way to make a living. I wouldn't want to not be answering questions. If I already knew all the bits, then it'd be a bit boring.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Robert. Thank you so much for giving up some of your very valuable time and joining me here on Researcher Revealed. If you have been listening to this and you are interested more in what Rob does, or getting to know more about Cadra Insights, go into the episode description, because I'll put his links there, his website, all of that sort of stuff, as well as other bits and pieces about him, so you can learn a little bit more. And other than that, I will see you all again in another 3 weeks. Don't go away. Up next, we have the top 3 takeaways from this week's podcast by Dr. Rosalind Austin. I'm really enjoying this podcast, how by having an open conversation with somebody, you end up going in places where I didn't expect to go at the beginning of that conversation. In preparation for today's episode, I learned a little bit more about Robert, and how he'd done a PhD in biomedicine. And I was expecting the conversation to go in a very different trajectory. And I found it really, really interesting that actually, even though he has left the academic world, and he left that sort of field around biofilms and how they can affect people's outcomes and affect their health, how he's used that desire to assist people to maintain a thread of research in his career, even though he's left that academic side of things. So for me, my top takeaway with Robert is that even though his career trajectory has taken him away from that more academic research around biomedicine and biofilms, that he's discovered through a very unique journey a way to embed research into his career so that he's able to feel that he's still helping people to improve people's health. Now, for him, that focus and that shift has now changed to, instead of being about the patients, to being about those researchers, those people who are having those ideas. And that a big part of making research have impact and translating it into the healthcare system is around helping researchers along their research journey. Second takeaway that I have is that, and I'll put it as one of the chapters in this episode, is that he kind of shed light into the wider scope of a research cycle within health. And I think traditionally a lot of people more think of the research cycle as in research question, experiment, analysis, dissemination, research question, and round and round and round you go. But actually, research in and of itself is a lot bigger than that. And he highlighted a couple of different stages in what I would say is the more macro version of research. That, yes, that interesting question. So that observation that you want to test, that you have to get people to participate in, that you have to write up, you have to disseminate, but that you also need to, in order to make that successful, you also need to consider the environment in which you're going to ask that question and how to make it successful at recruiting so that you get enough and a big enough, powerful sample size to be able to say strong things about your observations. But also that feedback and communication, and that being about more than just dissemination to the academic or the clinical world, but that it also needs to embed in it, how are you going to translate those findings so that it's impactful for policymakers, for decision makers, for budget holders, all of those other people. So having a bit wider view is sort of his now way of having a career around research, is helping researchers navigate that more macro picture to better ensure a successful outcome on their idea that will, yes, impact on patients, but possibly populations, clinicians, a lot of other users. So yeah, I think for me that was the second takeaway, is that the research cycle is bigger than what you might initially think it is. Now, the last takeaway. And I loved how he said this, like mid conversation. He just threw it out there like it was some sort of like easy thing to do. And he's like, to make research happen and to make research have an impact, you just have to ask the right people the right questions. And I challenged him on it. I'm like, yeah, that sounds easy. But how do you know who those right people are and what are the right questions? And so again, I think, he gave some really good tips on, even at a very early stage, what researchers should be considering, what we should be thinking about to ease that translation into the real world. And I think, again, even though you might be at a beginning stage of your journey, is, think about it from a bigger lens, invite other people's opinions on it. And I liked how he said it, like, don't just get your friends and family to tell you about it, the people who don't like you to tell you about it, because they're going to tell you the truth. And I think it's a really important thing to remember, is that you need to have a bigger scope and that you need to have a wide view of who all the people are that are going to be impacted by this thing that you're interested in, and what are the questions, not that are important to you, but that are important to them. So yeah, ask the right questions to the right people as my third takeaway. Right, that's it. As always, definitely check out the episode description. I put quite a lot of information in there, both on YouTube as well as on the podcast player of choice. There should be quite a few details in there: who he is, what his website is, how you can track him down, even read some of the publications that he's been involved in. And until next time, keep asking why.